Many professionals can explain ideas quite clearly in English, but when they need to explain what actually happened in a situation, things often become confusing. Maybe a project suddenly changed direction. Maybe a client introduced new requirements. Or maybe something unexpected happened during a meeting. Explaining that sequence of events clearly requires something called narrative tenses. And by the end of this video, you'll have a much clearer idea of how to use them when describing situations at work. Narrative tenses are the verb forms we use to tell stories about the past. They help listeners understand what was happening in the background, what happened next, and sometimes what had already happened earlier. In English, the most common narrative tenses are past simple, past continuous, past perfect. When these work together, they allow you to explain events clearly and logically. And that's exactly what professionals need when describing projects, meetings, or unexpected situations at work. Let's briefly look at how these tenses usually work together. The past continuous often describes the background situation. For example, we were preparing the final presentation. This tells us what was happening at that moment. The past simple then describes the main event. For example, the client sent us new requirements. So together we get, we were preparing the presentation when the client sent us new requirements. The listener can now easily understand the sequence of events. Sometimes you also want to explain something that happened earlier before the main situation. This is where the past perfect becomes useful. For example, the client had already changed their strategy. Now we have three time layers. First, the earlier situation, then the background activity, and finally, the main event. When these are organized clearly, the explanation becomes much easier to follow. Let's look at a slightly longer example from a project situation. Imagine you're explaining what happened during a product launch. You might say something like this. We were preparing the launch presentation when the marketing team noticed a problem with the pricing data. They realized that the finance department had updated the figures earlier that morning. Here we can clearly follow the sequence. The team was preparing the presentation. Then a problem appeared. And we also learned that the figures had already been changed earlier. This structure helps the listener understand what happened and why. Narrative tenses aren't just grammar. They're a communication tool. Professionals use them when they need to explain why a project changed direction, describe how a problem appeared, report what happened during a meeting, or tell the story behind the decision. If those events aren't organized clearly, the explanation quickly becomes confusing. But when you use narrative tenses effectively, the situation becomes much easier for others to understand. One helpful strategy is to think about three questions. What was happening? What happened? And what had already happened earlier? Those three questions naturally guide you toward the correct structure. So narrative tenses are really about clarity. They allow you to explain past situations step by step so that listeners can easily follow the story. And that's an important skill in professional communication. If you'd like to practice more grammar that helps you sound natural and confident in English at work, there are more lessons on the channel covering key topics like phrasal verbs, idioms, and collocations. You can explore those in the videos on screen now.